So good morning, everyone. It's a delight to have such a good audience here for the World Bank webinar series on smart cities. My name is Ilari Lindi, and I'm Senior Operations Officer at the World Bank ICT practice, and I will moderate the webinar today. Today's webinar, Open and Agile Smart Cities, is the 12th webinar in our overall Smart City webinar series. And we are delivering this webinar together with our partner, European Network of Living Labs, ENOL. The theme today is to show how municipal authorities from several different cities, together with their stakeholders from private sector and academia, as well as civil society, how they can collaborate and co-create services together with citizens, and especially enterprises, with a joint platform and more or less standardized resources. The purpose today is to open up what the initiative Open and Agile Cities is about, and how this networked initiative is aiming to create common framework for smart cities in Europe and gradually also extended globally. Now, before we kick off with our two distinguished speakers, I would like to remind you all that we will record this webinar, and in 24 hours you will get a link of this to your email. Please send any questions what you have during the presentations to the chat, and we try to accommodate all the questions at the end of the session when we have an open Q&A for the speakers. Now, moving to the introduction of our speakers, our first presentation comes from Professor Dr. Peter Ballon, and he's the Director of Living Labs at iMinds and Professor at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. He also had iMind Business Model Innovation Research Team, which is specializing in new business models for the telecommunications and media industries. Peter is leading various national and international projects on smart cities and open innovation, and since 2009, he's been an international secretary of European Network of Living Labs. Peter is a Belgian national contact point for Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative, and is very well versed to kick off our presentations today. Our second speaker is Juanjo Hierro, and he is the CTO of the unit in charge of the development of Telefónica's IoT and Smart Cities platform. In this role, Juanjo has combined his position as a coordinator and chief architect of Fiware, the open platform supported by public-private partnership between the European Commission and several ICT players worldwide. We will hear more about the Fiware platform today as well, but in short, it materializes some of the principles adopted in Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative, and Juanjo is also a member of the coordination board of Open and Agile Smart Cities. Today, Juanjo is leading several open source projects and open source initiatives, and this of course has allowed him to gain a lot of understanding of the whole open source phenomena and what kind of communities are behind to drive this. He has participated as invited expert in several workshops and work groups organized by European Commission regarding the technological objectives of the EU Research Framework Program. He's also a member of several advisory councils such as Imedea Software Institute of Madrid and the Spanish node of ICT Labs. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, Peter Ballon. Peter, floor is all yours now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ilari. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. My name is indeed Peter Ballon, and I will be talking to you about why we need a global marketplace for smart city services, why this requires standardized ways of handling real-time open data, and how the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative wants to support this. So when we talk about smart cities, we should always start with a definition, because it's not a straightforward term, I would say. And the definition I tend to use is the one from Townsend, saying that smart cities are places where information technology is combined with infrastructure, architecture, everyday objects, and even our bodies to address social, economic, and environmental problems. And if you look well, there are three levels in this definition. The first one is the information technology level. And it relates to the smartphone technologies, the wearable technologies, the sensor technologies, the smart camera technologies, the cloud infrastructure technologies that together make available and analyze and act upon a huge number of data. Because that is in essence what all these technologies together do. They gather, they analyze, and they act upon data. And this data is about, the second level of this definition, it is about architecture, objects, our bodies. It is about the world around us. So we are not talking about some abstract information superhighway. When we are talking about smart cities, it is about our direct physical context, the world around us, our street, our neighborhood, our city. And the third level is the one of these social, economic, and environmental problems that we address. Smart cities is always goal-driven. It is always related to a certain objective that you want to reach. Now, I think that a lot of you, or most of you, will agree with these three levels. And even though maybe this kind of definition is not always well understood, I think it is pretty well established. But there is a fourth level, which is maybe much less clear. And that is the level of who will drive the smart city innovation and implementation. And there are very different, radically different views upon who should drive the smart city operations. And typically you have, on the one hand, you have what we call a top-down vision, where you have a centralized rollout and a centralized management of a smart city system, I would say, where you have typically one or only a few major IT vendors that are executing a tender for the central city government. Like you see here in this picture, is the example of the Smart City Operations Center in Rio de Janeiro, operated mainly by IBM. But you have also a radically different or radically opposed type of view of the smart city, of who should operate it or who should drive it. And that's what we call the bottom-up vision. An example is this smart citizen sensor kit, which allows ordinary citizens, neighborhood organizations, local businesses to start smart city services themselves, to start gathering information about their environment. For instance, this sensor kit, it allows citizens to collect sensor data about pollution levels, about noise levels in their neighborhood, and to share that with one another. So that is a different bottom-up type of approach. Now, both of these approaches, each of them have advantages, but also disadvantages if they are operated in a standalone way. And so more and more we realize that instead of that, while the top-down approach, it offers a scalable, a harmonized approach, but it lacks the creativity, the dynamic of the actual stakeholders in the city. And on the other hand, the bottom-up approach, it's very creative, it's very dynamic, but it often lacks the scalability and the harmonization of the top-down approach. So increasingly we see that we need a different type of model. We need what we call a platform model, where the city provides the platform and makes sure that there is a scalable and harmonized basis of resources on which to work, and then leaves a lot of the smart city application developments to the stakeholders in the city themselves. And this kind of approach is able to combine, I would say, the best of both worlds. And that is depicted in this model, where you see on the bottom layer, you see the basic resources, the platform resources related to sensor networks, for instance, related to data, for instance, that need to be there, that need to be available. On the top layer, on the first layer, you see the different stakeholders. You see the citizens, you see the public sector, you see the private sector, and you want to involve all of them in your smart city approach. And then in the middle, there we find what it's all about, right? The smart urban applications, who are mobile, context-aware, location-based, who deal with the direct here and the direct now. And they come about, they come into existence, they are created by the interplay between those two other layers, the top layer of the stakeholders and the platform resources at the bottom. So the sensible way to go about a smart city approach, we think, is to make sure that this interplay happens. And that is what we call the smart city ecosystem approach. It is making sure that this interplay between the stakeholders and the platform resources happens, and that it results in a wealth of smart urban applications. And in the phase of innovation and experimentation, you do that via a living lab. You organize a living lab laboratory involving different stakeholders so they can test and they can experiment with the platform resources. Of course, once they are mature, once they are ready to go to the market, then you need a marketplace. You need there to be a marketplace where these services and applications can be introduced and can compete with one another. So that is the smart city ecosystem model that we think is most appropriate. And if we accept that this is required for successful smart cities and smart city implementations, well, then we also know a number of things that we really need to do to make that happen. Because at this moment, such marketplaces at least they are underdeveloped right now. They are underdeveloped at the local level, they are underdeveloped at the national level, and they are underdeveloped at the global level, at the international level. It is very hard for a Mexican application developer to develop a smart city application for a city in Europe, and vice versa, for a European developer to go beyond Europe. We don't have such marketplaces, well-functioning marketplaces right now. So what is the market failure? What is the primary market failure? At least one that we need to solve in order to get to such a marketplace. Well, we already said that data is the basis. It is of a smart city implementation. It is the fuel for the smart city. And that is true for very large cities, multi-million cities, like in London. You have the Transport for London authority that opened up a whole lot of mobility data. And to this point, 5,000 private developers, 5,000 developers have registered to use that open data. So it shows the potential. It shows the dynamic. Once you make sure that there is this data resource, that you have solved this market failure, then the market can come into being. And it's not just true for multi-million cities like London. We see the same approach in Helsinki, which is a mid-sized city, I would say, around 1 million or maybe a little bit more inhabitants. We see the same also in small cities. In Ghent, in Belgium, which is only a few hundred of thousands of inhabitants, we see the same dynamic of the city making sure that the platform resource of the data is there, and then a vibrant smart city service and application ecosystem that comes up. So this is the model, the ecosystem model that we need to achieve. And a lot of cities understand, let's say, the basics of that. And a lot of cities have started to implement open data strategies to solve this market failure. But it is not enough to have a simple open data strategy. And my message today is that if you want a really vibrant marketplace, you have to move from, let's say, the typical or the easy open data, which is statistical open data, or which is opening times of your local facilities, these kind of static data. You need to move to real-time data, open real-time data, because if I want to create really added value smart city applications, I want to know what is happening now, at this moment, in my context, in my city. So I need to move from just simply open data to open real-time data. And secondly, I need to move from just making this available, just having some website where you publish this on, to making it used, to making sure there is usage. So that means in a format that is very easy to use. And secondly, by a very wide audience of a lot of developers. And those are the things, those are the challenges that cities are facing right now. So to solve the market failure, level 1 is opening your data at the local level. Level 2 is opening real-time data at the local level. And level 3 is opening real-time data at the national and the international level. And it's only when we are there that we have solved this particular market failure. And that is exactly what we are trying to do with the Open and Agile Smart Cities Initiative. Why? And this is why we need de facto standards. Probably not formal standards, but de facto standards, that everybody uses the same easy approach. Because cities, they should have very easy formats and standards to publish their open real-time data to the whole wide world. Developers should have access to open real-time data from many cities in the same format and standard. And this open real-time data should also be machine readable in a consistent format and standard, so that it can be automatically incorporated into smart city applications and services. So that is exactly the goal that the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative wants to achieve. And my colleague Juanjo will go into more detail, but just to say that these are the three standards, the three de facto standards that we are proposing and that we are asking cities to commit to. It's at the level of the open data platform, which is the platform that allows you to manage, to publish, to share your data. There we are recommending the open source data portal platform CCAN, which is supported by the Open Knowledge Foundation and which is world leading as a data portal platform. At the level of the data models, the way to structure your data, we put forward the City SDK data model, of which the Open Data Institute in the UK said that this is currently the best effort that exists worldwide to bring real-time city data in a uniform way. And in terms of the API that can be automatically used by any application or web service, we are recommending the NGSI, the Open Mobile Alliance API for queries and subscriptions to context information. So those are three basic building blocks that you need for real-time open data, and three ones that are the best candidates at this moment for making them into a standard approach. And we want cities to commit to that. We are asking cities to commit to that, not as a plan, not just as a roadmap, but driven by real implementation. And that is why that is put in the middle, real projects, real procurements, just going along and in your next project, making sure that these standards are there. So these are the basic principles of the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative. It's born in the EU, but it's a global initiative. We work with everybody, but we want to have the cities, the city mayors, the city CTOs, the city CIOs to be involved, the ones who are really commanding the city strategy and the city budgets. We have these three standard mechanisms that I talked about and the driven by implementation approach. We have the requirement that cities cannot join on their own. This is very important, and I will come back to it in 2 minutes. Cities do not join on their own, but they join together as a national network. Because as I said, this is not just about a local marketplace, also not just about a global marketplace, but also about national harmonization and national market places. We give cities 1 year to implement this. So when you enter the initiative, we offer you a maturity check, and then you have 1 year to start integrating those different elements. And all this is governed by the task force, which is composed of the national contact points in each country. Okay, so this is something very new. This is something that has just started. It started this year, in January this year, here in Brussels. It started with just 3 countries from one continent, from Europe, launching this initiative. But it has grown tremendously. There is a lot of enthusiasm around this. And 2 months later, because this was in March 2015, not January as the slide said, in March, we were able to launch the first wave of cities, and we already had 31 cities, 31 mayors who had committed to join the initiative from 7 countries in 2 continents. And the countries were Finland, Denmark, Spain, Belgium, Italy, Portugal, and Brazil, where we have these concrete commitments from large cities, from mid-sized cities, and from small cities. And we are going forward. In 3 weeks from now, we will launch the second wave. We will announce the second wave of open and agile smart cities in Tampere in Finland, and we will have at least 60 cities from at least 12 countries, from at least 3 continents who will officially sign it. Already we have confirmed the Netherlands, Ireland, Scotland, France, and Australia to join the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative. And it's moving forward. There are currently talks and negotiations with Canada, with the USA, with Mexico, with the UK, with Estonia, with different countries. Some of them may join still in the second wave. Some of them may join in the third wave. But the basic constatation that you can have is it's growing, and it's growing fast, and there is a lot of enthusiasm. And so if you want to join as well, if you think this is important, again, I want to emphasize, you enter through a national network. You need to talk to other cities first. You need to establish a national contact point and make sure that you have a number of cities that want to join together. And that has the benefit of providing a single point of entry for government, that you have a coordinated approach towards the open data. You can have a joint investment plan for smart cities. You can jointly link to the research infrastructure for smart cities, and you can jointly create events that evangelize this idea in your country. So this is very important that you enter through a national network. But we also support this centrally. Since 2 days, only 2 days ago, we established the Open and Agile Smart Cities Secretariat here in Brussels. It's hosted by my organization, iMinds, which is the national contact point for OASC Belgium, and together with the European Network of Living Labs. And we also got on board a director, Seppo Hataya, who will direct the secretariat from the same location. You see here the email address, info@oascities.org. You will see at the end in Juanjo's presentation also the links, the URLs that you can consult. But for any information that you would like in addition to this, you can always send a message to this email address. So this was basically my message. We need a global marketplace for smart city services. This requires standardized ways of handling real-time open data on a global level, and the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative is a new and very dynamic way of achieving this goal. So thank you very much, and I hand over for the second session.
Thank you very much, Peter. Fascinating, and of course, from the World Bank point of view, this is very interesting time because we are following the build-up of such a global initiative in real time. So it's a very timely way also to engage with the constituency what the bank works with. Now the next speaker, Juanjo, will go a little bit more on details what the standardization looks like, and also touches more the issue of how to link with the Fiverr platform. So I give the floor to you, Juanjo, now, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are connected from. And as has already been explained, well, Peter already introduced what are the Open and Agile Smart Cities principles. My presentation is going to elaborate a bit more on the details about this common set of de facto standards that we are trying to push going forward, and in the intent to develop a smart city market where applications and solutions can be developed for one and multiple cities. Let me start first with the Common API principle, which has to do with the OMA NGSI standard. NGSI was a standard that was developed by an organization which is called the Open Mobile Alliance. And what we did in Fiverr was that we implemented that standard and we created an open source reference implementation of that standard. The specs of these API are public and royalty free, so you may either choose to work with this open source reference implementation that has been developed in Fiverr, but multiple different providers can develop their own and even evolve their platforms to support this API. This API has to do with getting access to information about what's going on in the city at any moment. As Peter has mentioned in his presentation, we really believe that to start creating this market for smart cities, we have to make open data available on real time. So NGSI provide a basic API, vendor neutral, that allows this to happen. What is NGSI about generally? I will try to give an overall introduction, and I wanted to start with this funny picture. Probably if you are asked, what do you think about this guy who is washing his car in the middle of a heavy rain, probably we all would agree that he doesn't look very smart. And if you were asked, why do you think he is not a smart guy while he's doing this, well, probably you would answer, well, isn't he aware of what's going on around? It's raining. So that the point I want to make is that indeed you cannot talk about bringing smart functionality if you are not aware of what's going on. So when we talk about smart cities, we have to start thinking and start introducing the concept of context awareness. This is one of the main points that cities that were involved in the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative have agreed. We have to bring an API that allows this context information be available in a standard way. That is what the NGSI API is about. And trying to do it very simple, supporting a model that relies on the notion of context. What do you mean by context in a city? Well, it's about the entities that are relevant, describing the state of the city, and the values that attributes characterizing those entities hold over time. So we can talk, when we talk about a city, about the buses that are part of their public transport systems, the citizens themselves, the streets, the shops, and every of them having characterized attributes that evolve over time with values that change very dynamically. And we want a city to provide access to all that information. Information which may come from different sources, but the complexity of how that information arrives would be hidden to the developers of solutions, the developers of applications, which will get access to this information using a very simple API. We have run a number of hackathons and challenges and proof of concepts with startups and cities and solutions integrators. We have experience where developers, a standard Java developer or web developer is capable to create their first applications using Fiber NGSI in just one day. Information may come from existing systems dealing with the management of the different verticals, waste management, water management, energy management, transport management, but may come from other sources like sensor networks that the city may deploy in the field, or even third-party smart city applications, because this is one fundamental vision and the OASC approach, that of transforming the city into a platform that brings information not for only internal consumption, but also enabling consumption by third-party developers who can then bring innovative applications that deliver outstanding new services for the citizens. These data from different sources will be available using Fiber NGSI API in a very simple manner and common manner that is the same from one city to another. It is not only about coping with different sources of information, it's also about enabling different systems to consume that information. So the different city services management systems will be able to not just provide information about information they handle, to enrich context information and make it available to other systems or third-party developers. It's also about these systems being capable to consume that information. It's also about enabling the creation of overall city governance systems. If we incorporate and introduce this notion of context information accessible in a standard way, that leads the path to creation of KPIs, definition of KPIs, and ways to handle and monitor those KPIs. don't forget that this context information evolves over time. So the API not only provides access to what's going on at any given moment, but also all the historic data capable to handle information at larger scale. And last but not least, making that information available to third parties, as we explained before. Because cities should not try to come up with the solution for all the problems. We have to bring the playing field for innovation to happen by means of exploiting available information. A number of aspects to highlight about the API. First is this aspect of not being intrusive in the architecture of systems that have been deployed by a given city to solve a given vertical. We understood, and this came as a requirement from the cities, that we cannot interfere in the procurement processes. Cities have to have the right to select whatever best solution they find for a given vertical segment. But the point is that those systems should be able to very easily connect to the main context information management systems to bring the data that is necessary, could be available to export to other systems or third-party developers, or be able to be handled and managed for the overall calculations of KPIs. It's also an API particularly well suited to connect to the Internet of Things. If we think about cities in the future, smart cities, we are talking about cities with a lot of sensors being deployed, a lot of intelligent devices, robots and drones and stuff. And NGSI provide a common way to access all these variety of devices, handling and being able to deal with the wide variety of IoT protocols today. Indeed, the approach that we have adopted with NGSI is rather that of not trying to solve the battle of the standards at IoT level. That would be really impossible, but really bringing a standard where no standard exists today, which is context information management. That was regarding a API, common NGSI. The second principle was about the data models. And here the vision is, well, with the NGSI API, we clearly can reduce costs when porting smart city applications from one city to another. We have been able to standardize the exchange mechanism, but we need to go a step further to standardize the messages that are exchanged, the data model that and the vocabulary that is used for making that at the end of the day lead to actual interoperability. So that's why we understood in the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative that we have to complement the adoption of AGSI with the definition of common standard data models. Like, what is the approach for defining those standards? Well, there are several alternatives, but we definitely thought that the design by committee approach would not be the best approach. Such kind of approach has proven to be wrong in many other cases and standardization efforts, and is overall it brings slow speed when what we want to do is go faster. As opposed to that, what we intended to put in place is a driven by implementation approach, where we will identify a number of real problems in cities. We will try to find out applications that can solve those problems and that exist already, and take them to extract the standard data models that can be adopted and published for other solution integrators to be based upon. So what we did in Open and Agile Smart Cities is to start that path, leveraging on existing work, as Peter explained before, we are starting with the first set of the standard data models, which is that one coming from CDSDK initiative. And we are now going to start working on creating new standard data models and creating the adopted ones by means of following a driven by implementation approach. We will do this by different means, but following a slide more or less illustrate the process. We want to engage the cities that are part of the OASC initiative. We will make calls to select applications that can help to illustrate how identify problems by the cities can be solved. And with this, we will create showcases and we will start a standardization process regarding the data models that the applications need. With all this, one of the advantages is when the process finishes, you don't only have a standard set of data models, but a number of applications that already work with them and can illustrate how problems get solved. The last principle was about making both data and the interfaces be publicly available for developers. And for that, we needed a platform, and that platform relying on what is an open source reference implementation was Seekan. We have technology already in place and proved that connect context information providers with the Seekan platform. So now, if you were familiar with Seekan, Seekan is a kind of a catalog that allows you to navigate through existing data sets and resources. And this has been extended to not only provide access to historical information, but also to resources accessible through the standard NGSI API. So you can have entries, for instance, in a Seekan platform that will give you access to the position of the buses in the streets of a given city at a given moment when you click on that entry in the Seekan catalog. So that is, in a nutshell, the principles, and we wanted to somehow give you some details. Now, to end, a couple of slides regarding how this connects to Fireware. Well, Fireware is, as Hilary introduced, a big initiative that was born in Europe, but now expanding with a global ambition. Is trying to create an ecosystem for development of smart applications. And of course, one of the areas and domains where Fireware is being more active is that of smart cities, and sustaining its activities in a number of pillars. The first one, providing an open source reference implementation for the components that would be needed at platform level to create smart applications. Second, by providing a sandbox environment where entrepreneurs and integrators can test the technology and play with data, and also running an acceleration program that would help startups and entrepreneurs to be able to explore the technology and materialize interesting solutions based on the standards technologies. Fireware Mundus and iHubs are other initiatives that bring support to this Fireware initiative, trying to expand this globally with the necessary support. Fireware, then, therefore, the connection with open and agile smart cities is that of making sure that there is an open source reference implementation for the pieces that supports the principles. Then, aside to that, or complemented to that, it also brings a number of components that can also be useful for the cities to really, go further in the development of smart city solutions. But that goes as a complement to OASC. What is important to highlight today is that FIWARE is the instrument to make sure that the OASC principles are being implemented, are ready for the market, and there is an open source reference implementation available. And last slide is trying to summarize what I have said. I think strong message has to be given, making clear that creation of a sustainable ecosystem is very much linked to the notion of platform, which means talking about standard APIs and standard data models. And the point here is we need to answer the question about what's the challenge. Do we want it open? Do we want this to be an ecosystem where many different players can compete? We think the answer is yes. And the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative paves the way for achieving that goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juanjo. And I've been following the thread, and we have a lot of debate already going there internally, and unfortunately, very little time for the questions. But let's start with a couple of obvious ones, and I think what you already touched in your last note, Juanjo, it's about openness, and with openness, of course, comes to responsibilities. And we have Venka Maturi, who is actually asking and making a very good note that access to user information can open really, it's a can of worms with the issues regarding privacy and security that touches with people's age, their location, and their preferences. So what Venka is asking, that who in this context and this platform is in charge of maintaining the databases? And she also continues with the quite relevant question from the developing country point of view, that who is responsible for paying the data storage? This is an issue, of course, with many proponents from the developing world would like to know. Juanjo, could you open up a little bit these issues? Juanjo, it seems like we have a problem with the connection with Juanjo, so let me take the same question and
can you hear me now?
Put it. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, somehow my microphone was muted. So what I was answering is that the fact that we were explaining that it's all about providing access to context information doesn't mean that this access is not under the proper control. Indeed, NGSI comes with the ability to be integrated with standards for security and access control, like OAuth and XACML, for instance. And that would allow the city to make sure that the data that gets accessed is always accessed by the people who, or the systems that have the right privileges for doing so. And of course, also providers of data should be and can be allowed to manage who can get access to that information. What is regarding the storage and who would own that storage, the whole vision is that actually the city is in a perfect position to become a neutral provider of contact information. So rather than making this information being hosted in in the hands of an individual company, internet player, cities can really provide this infrastructure as a common public infrastructure that that can be used, feed with data that the city provides, but also enabling third parties to host their data in that public infrastructure if they make that available to other parties.
Thank you, Juanjo. And now moving on a little bit on the incentive side of cities to participate. Saki Kori asks that what are the incentives provided for cities to adopt the standards or prospective standards through collaboration? This is a question, I guess, for Peter. Would you be able to highlight a little bit based on your experience also as working closely with the cities, that how do the cities see this and what are the incentives in place for them to participate?
I guess you have to unmute your mic.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Could you please connect your web, please?
Sorry? Okay. So in terms of incentives, the first thing to make clear is that the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative itself does not provide direct incentives. We are not sponsoring. We don't have also a direct stake in this. We are not producing this. We are just advocating these open standards to be used by anyone because we think it is important for the development of the smart city market. In terms of the incentives for an individual city, well, the first one is scale. A lot of cities are, at this moment, they are considering smart city strategies. And at the same time, they are being approached by different vendors, different people with ideas, different innovators that all try to convince them, that all want to work with them, that all want to bring their smart cities to the market. But it's very difficult for a city on an individual basis with the individual to deal individually with developers, with vendors that happen to be in the neighborhood or that happen to be interested in you. And it may be easier if you are a multi-million wealthy and a powerful city, but especially if you are a smaller city, or especially if you are from a region where there may not be that much activity, it can be really hard. And so to adapt this kind of open, standardized approach is basically not just opening up your data to a wider audience and making that more easily available, but it is possibly profiting from all these different services that then can be developed with your data. In essence, the city doesn't need to develop themselves. They don't need to develop a lot of those smart city services and applications themselves anymore, or even they don't have to commission them anymore. They don't even have to pay for them anymore, as long as they make sure that the open real-time data is available and that developers from all across the country, all across the globe can use them. And that is, I think, the main incentive. So it is a way, I think, it's a cost-effective, it's a smart way for cities to bring real substance to their smart city vision and to their smart city policy. And that's also the reason why the cities in Belgium have joined this initiative. A second incentive, I think, is the need for cities to start talking to each other. Also within the same country. How are you doing this? What strategy do you use? How do you go about real-time open data? So this is a way for them to start talking to each other. And finally, of course, it's also a way for them to be visible to developers, to be visible internationally. If you join this initiative, you are making sure that there is visibility to the fact that you want to be a smart city and you want.
Thank you, Peter. I think you touched also a very valid point from the World Bank point of view when in this discussion. I would like to continue with the final question to you as well on this note. Do you have any criteria or what is expected from the city or group of cities, as you said, consortium of cities who would wish to join to the initiative? Is there a criteria regarding the infrastructure in place, or let's say to the developer population and the coordination of activities vis-a-vis city innovation ecosystem in that regards, or how do you assess that?
So I think the most important aspect here is commitment. So as I said, there is a maturity check that we check whether the city is just beginning with this open real-time data policy and just beginning to implement these standards, whether they are already, so to speak, halfway or whether they are already mature. All of them in principle can join, but it is necessary to have real commitment, to do something real, to go to real implementation in the next months, in the next year. That is crucial, and also the commitment to talk to other cities in your national network. I think it is very important that any city or anyone involved with cities, that they check out, first of all, the URL that Juanjo gave. So on the Connected Smart Cities website, you can, and the list is the link is also now visible in the chat. If you go there, you see the letter of commitment that we are asking to cities. You see a background document that explains this letter of commitment, so that makes it very clear what is being asked from cities in terms of commitment. So I would really invite everybody to go to that URL. And then secondly, the email address that I showed, the info@oascities.org, for any information on who should I contact. Are there already cities in my country who are active? Is there a national contact point in my country already? Who should I contact? So I would invite everybody to ask those questions directly on the email address.
That's a very good summary. I have one direct question for Juanjo, coming from Gabriel Mazzini and Argentina. Can you very briefly outline what are the steps to join the group of cities underlined above, or who current memberships, if you start really integrating group of cities from Argentina into the network? Where do you start?
Well, I think Peter can even elaborate better than me, but there was this email address that Peter introduced, info@oascities.org, where we suggest that those cities send an email about their intention to be part of the initiative, I'm sure they will get answer any questions they may bring. Nevertheless, in the link that I have in the last slide, which is this connected smartcities.eu open and agile smart cities webpage, which was also written on the chat. You will get access to all the information about the letter of intent templates and a vision paper elaborating on what is the global vision and intent. But again, don't hesitate to contact through that email address, and we are there to help.
Thank you very much. We are now closing point of the webinar. I think that in summary, it would be perfectly fine if whoever participated in a webinar contacts directly to the speakers. Should you wish to work also through the bank, we would be very much happy to help you, put you in contact and facilitate this collaboration. And I think this applies regardless of geographic location on which city you as a participant currently reside, whether it's an African or whether it's a Caribbean, whether it's a Latin American or Southeast Asian. I think we are touching an issue here which is global and where everybody can learn. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we will record this session and we will share the session as well as the slides. And we do also have some links and additional material regarding the activities which we are happy to put forward as well. So you will get all this material, and in return I would like you to also make sure that you answer to our questionnaire about the webinar. Please fill that so we know actually that we can continue this and what are the pinpoints and the most interesting areas what you would like to hear. So I will stop it here, and I welcome you to our next webinar in the same Smart City series. It will be 22nd of September, and we will introduce a couple of interesting initiatives regarding energy management processes and mechanisms in cities. Megawatt challenge will